A damp fog crept in through the windows of the apartment. Elizabeth Lester stirred her coffee slowly as she watched Trenton tie his tie in front of the hallway mirror. The 15th floor of an apartment complex in an upscale San Francisco neighborhood offered a view of the bay, but today everything was hidden behind a shroud of fog. Much like the last 5 years of marriage, Elizabeth thought. Trenton checked the knot of his tie once more, adjusted his expensive cufflinks. "I may be late today," he said without turning to look at his wife. "We have a complicated case and the client wants an unscheduled meeting." Elizabeth nodded weakly, stroking her rounded belly. 4 months pregnant. She'd been looking forward to this baby for a long time. Trenton had always cited busyness, his career at the law firm, saying she should wait a little longer. And now that she's finally pregnant, he's even more distant. "Do you even remember that I have a routine checkup on Friday?" she asked. Trenton froze for a second, then nodded. "Sure, I'll try to make myself available." Just like last week, Elizabeth thought, but remained silent. She watched her husband pick up his leather briefcase, expensive as their whole life had been. "I love you," he said mechanically before closing the door behind him. Elizabeth was alone in the spacious apartment, furnished tastefully and clearly at great expense. Trenton's firm paid its lawyers well, especially ambitious ones like him. 6 years ago, when they'd met, Elizabeth had been working at an advertising agency. Trenton seemed the epitome of success then, educated, confident, with excellent prospects. She'd given up her career for her family. For him, morning sickness reminded her of pregnancy again. Elizabeth walked slowly to the kitchen, automatically picked up a neon sticker from the refrigerator. Naomi comes at 12. Her little sister had promised to stop by. Sisterhood had always been difficult for Elizabeth. Naomi, younger than her by 3 years, but always the one who caught her eye, bright, emotional, unpredictable. Their parents, Howard and Delia Griffin, always said that Elizabeth was their reliable child, and Naomi their creative one. Behind those words were years of different attitudes, different expectations. Elizabeth had always been the right sister, the one that didn't cause trouble. The clock showed almost noon when the intercom bell rang. Elizabeth let her sister in. Naomi took the elevator, thin with disheveled hair, wearing a cheap denim jacket over a simple dress. She worked as a waitress in a cafe with occasional part-time jobs. "Hi, Liz." Naomi hugged her sister, but in an odd way, as if she was afraid of hurting her. Elizabeth noticed that her sister was paler than usual, dark circles under her eyes. "You look terrible," Elizabeth said. "What's wrong?" Naomi walked into the apartment, sinking down on the couch in the living room. Her gaze wandered around the room, avoiding her sister's eyes. "There's something I have to tell you." Naomi's voice trembled. "And it will change everything." Elizabeth felt everything inside her clench. Her intuition screamed danger. "Are you pregnant?" she asked, sitting down next to her sister. It wouldn't be the first time. Naomi was always choosing unsuitable men, getting into trouble. Naomi laughed bitterly. "If only." She swallowed, then looked up at her sister. "Liz, I have HIV." The silence that followed those words was deafening. Elizabeth stared at her sister, not understanding, not wanting to understand. "What? How?" Her hands instinctively went to her stomach, protecting her unborn child from this terrible news. Naomi clenched her hands into fists so hard her knuckles turned white. "Trenton," she said one word, and Elizabeth's world crumbled. "I've been sleeping with your husband, Liz, for the last 3 months. Elizabeth felt the air stick in her lungs. She looked at her sister, but all she saw was a red mist in front of her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Trenton infected me," Naomi pitched forward. "I thought that it was something special. He said he was unhappy with you, that your marriage was exhausted. I was such a fool, Liz. But when I found out you were pregnant, when I found out my test results, I couldn't keep quiet. The baby mustn't be harmed." Elizabeth got up from the couch, feeling the ground slipping away from under her feet. "You slept with my husband? The father of my child?" Every word was hard to say. "And now you're telling me that he has... I didn't know, I swear." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. I took the test 2 weeks ago when I got this weird fever. The doctor said I could have been infected months ago. I haven't had any other partners, Liz. Just Trenton. Elizabeth pulled back, taking a step back as if physical distance could protect her from those words. You're lying, she hissed. You've always been jealous of me, always wanted what was mine. Liz, please. Naomi jumped up from the couch. I hate myself for this, but you have to get tested, now, for the baby, the baby. Elizabeth put her hand on her stomach. Her baby. Get out, she said, pointing to the door. Liz, get out, Elizabeth shouted, grabbing a decorative vase off the coffee table and swinging it. Naomi recoiled but didn't move toward the exit. I'm disgusted by what I did, she said quietly. But I'd be even more disgusted if I didn't say anything, knowing that your baby and you were in danger. Get yourself checked out. Today, the clinic on 19th has rapid tests. Naomi pulled a business card out of her bag and put it on the table. I'll be waiting for your call, whatever you decide next. When the door closed behind her sister, Elizabeth collapsed to the floor, pressing her hands to her stomach. Hate and fear replaced each other in waves, overwhelming her. The relationship between the sisters had always been complicated. Since childhood, it was as if they had existed at different poles of the same family. Elizabeth, the eldest, the epitome of responsibility and planning, and Naomi, the rebel who lived for today. When Elizabeth introduced the family to Trenton Lester, then an aspiring lawyer, everyone was thrilled. Successful, educated, ambitious young man seemed the perfect match for the prudent Elizabeth. Only Naomi remained wary. He's too smooth, she told her sister. Like plastic. Elizabeth put it down to jealousy. At 22, Naomi was a casual laborer with no education or prospects. Of course, she was jealous. After the wedding, the sisters' relationship became even more strained. Trenton often commented on Naomi's unfortunate life choices, emphasizing the difference between the sisters. And when Naomi lost her job and asked for a loan, paying it back late, Trenton declared that he did not want her in their home at all. Elizabeth, torn between her husband and sister, tried to smooth over the conflict. They met secretly, had lunch in a cafe when Trenton was at work called. Gradually, the communication fell apart. And then 3 months ago, Naomi called, said that she wanted to restore the relationship, that she had rethought a lot of things. Elizabeth, who by then had learned of her pregnancy, rejoiced. She wanted the baby to know her aunt. Trenton reacted strangely to the news of the sisters' reconciliation. He didn't openly object, but he stayed at work longer and was home less often when Naomi came over. Elizabeth had blamed it on his workload, and now it turned out that on the very days she thought her husband was working in the office, he was with her sister, her own sister. The 19th Street Clinic was an unremarkable building with tinted windows. Elizabeth sat in the waiting room, clutching her purse tightly. There were several other people around, all with lost looks, all studiously avoiding looking at each other. Mrs. Lester? The nurse, a dark-skinned, middle-aged woman with kind eyes, invited her into the office. Elizabeth gave blood a quick shot, a few drops. Then the agonizing wait began, 15 minutes that stretched into eternity. The doctor entered with an unreadable expression on his face, a stern, gray-haired African-American man with glasses. Mrs. Lester. His voice was steady, professional. Your rapid test is positive. Elizabeth stared at the doctor, not understanding. Positive. Positive for HIV. She's infected. Her baby. My baby? She squeezed out. There is a risk of mother-to-child transmission, the doctor began cautiously. But modern treatment methods significantly reduce this risk. With proper treatment during pregnancy, the chances of having a healthy baby are very high. The words sounded like absorbent cotton. I need to start treatment. Now. She sounded strangely calm. Yes, but first we have to do a confirmatory test. The doctor looked at her sympathetically. Rapid tests sometimes give false positives. It's not a false positive, Elizabeth cut her off. My husband, she stammered. I need to know everything about the treatment, everything about how to protect my baby. The next hour was spent discussing antiretroviral therapy, possible side effects, necessary tests. Elizabeth mechanically took notes, nodded, asked questions as if she were talking about someone else. It was only when the doctor mentioned the need to examine her partner that she flinched. "I'll tell my husband myself," she said coldly. He knows better than I do." Leaving the clinic, Elizabeth could not bring herself to return home. She wandered aimlessly through the streets, looking at the passers-by, hurrying, smiling, living their ordinary lives. A life she would no longer have. Without realizing, she dialed Shakira Page's number. They'd been friends since high school, had gone to college together. Shakira had been the one to warn Elizabeth about marrying Trenton too hastily. "Liz?" Her friend's voice sounded surprised. They hadn't spoken in weeks. "I need to talk to you," Elizabeth's voice trembled. It's urgent." Half an hour later, they were sitting in a quiet cafe in a remote part of town. Shakira worked as a nurse at the city hospital and looked tired after her shift, but she listened attentively without interrupting. "I have HIV," Elizabeth began without preamble. "Trenton cheated on me with Naomi, and he infected both of us." Shakira froze with the cup halfway to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" she exhaled. Elizabeth recounted everything: Naomi's morning visit, the confession, the visit to the clinic. With each word, she felt an icy lump of rage growing inside her. "He had to know," she finished. "He's a lawyer, for crying out loud. He knows about the liability for intentional contamination. He couldn't have been unaware of his diagnosis." Shakira silently took her hand. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Elizabeth looked out the window where the rain was beginning to drizzle. "How can I raise a child when I'm sick? How can I trust anyone again? He ruined my life, Shakira. He ruined my baby's life before he was even born." "Look," Shakira squeezed her hand tighter. "HIV is no longer a death sentence. You're going to live a long and full life, and so will your baby. But first you need to decide what to do about Trenton." Elizabeth looked up. There were no tears in them, just cold determination. "I know what to do about Trenton," she said quietly. It was almost 9 o'clock at night when Trenton came home. Elizabeth sat in the darkened living room, the light from the street lamps outlining her silhouette. "Liz? Why are you sitting in the dark?" Trenton flicked the light switch. She stared at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. Handsome, well-groomed, in an expensive suit, a successful lawyer, the father of her unborn child, the man who had cold-bloodedly condemned her and their unborn child to a lifelong illness. "Naomi came by today," Elizabeth said in a steady voice. Trenton froze, his hand with the briefcase trembling. "So?" he asked as indifferently as possible, but Elizabeth knew her husband well enough to recognize the shadow of concern in his eyes. "She told me about you." Elizabeth stood up. "About how you slept together for the last 3 months. About how you infected her with HIV. Trenton laughed, but the laughter sounded fake even to his own ears. "What kind of nonsense was that? Your sister's always been unstable. Do you really believe—" "I took the test," Elizabeth interrupted him. "It's positive. I have HIV, Trenton. Our baby could have HIV." She watched his face change from feigned bewilderment to wariness, then to poorly concealed fear. "There must be some kind of mistake," he muttered, taking a step back. "Rapid tests are often wrong." "You knew." Elizabeth took a step toward him. "You knew about your diagnosis, and you slept with me without protection anyway. You knew, and you slept with my sister. How many other women have you infected, Trenton? Liz, listen to me." "How many?" she screamed, grabbing a vase from the nearest table and throwing it at the wall next to her husband. The vase shattered, shards flying across the floor. Trenton recoiled. "You're crazy!" he exclaimed. "I didn't know about any HIV! Maybe it was your sister who infected me! Did you think of that? She's always been a whore!" Elizabeth lunged toward him, clenching her fists, but Trenton intercepted her hands. "Calm down. Think of the baby." "The baby?" Elizabeth broke free of his grip. "The child you condemned to disease? How dare you? You're a monster, Trenton, a monster!" He tried to hug her, but she pushed him away. "Don't touch me! Don't you ever touch me again!" Trenton backed away, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Liz, let's talk calmly if it's true. If I really do have HIV, I didn't know about it. I swear to you, we'll get through this together." "Together?" Elizabeth laughed, and that laugh scared Trenton more than her screams. "There is no together anymore, Trenton. You betrayed me. You slept with my sister. You gave us a deadly disease. HIV isn't a deadly disease anymore, he argued. There are treatments now. Drugs. Get out, Elizabeth said quietly. What? Get out of my house, she shouted, grabbing a heavy crystal ashtray from the table and swinging it at him. Trenton recognized the rage in her eyes and decided not to risk it. All right, I'll leave for the night, he said, retreating to the door. But tomorrow we'll talk it over in peace. Take your things and leave for good. Elizabeth walked over to the hall closet, opened the doors, and began throwing his clothes on the floor. You can move in with Naomi, or any other woman you've infected. Trenton watched her with a mixture of fear and confusion. Liz, this is our home together. You can't just kick me out. Leave nicely, Trenton. Elizabeth raised the ashtray threateningly. Because I swear I will hit you, and when the police come, I'll tell them that you deliberately infected me with HIV. You know what happens for that? Trenton went pale. As a lawyer, he was well aware that willful exposure to HIV had recently been changed from a felony to a misdemeanor in California, but a public censure could ruin his career. I'll leave, he said quietly, but we'll need to talk about the baby, about the future. Go away, Elizabeth repeated, turning away. Trenton packed some of his things into a gym bag and silently left the apartment. When the door closed behind him, Elizabeth slowly sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. Only now that he was gone did she allow herself to cry. The tears flowed nonstop, shaking her entire body. Her whole life, so right, so planned, was crumbling before her eyes. The pregnancy she had dreamed of was becoming a source of fear. The husband she trusted turned out to be a traitor and a liar. Her sister, her own blood, betrayed her with the one who should have loved her most. Elizabeth cried until her tears ran dry. Then she got up, walked to the bathroom, and took a long look at her reflection. Puffy eyes, pale face, chapped lips, and somewhere inside, a tiny life depending on her. Her hand rested on her stomach. She couldn't allow herself to despair. Not now. Her baby needed her, strong, determined, ready to fight. Elizabeth dialed Shakira's number. Could I sleep over? She asked when her friend answered the phone. I kicked Trenton out, but I don't want to be home alone. Sure, Shakira answered without hesitation. I'll get the guest bedroom ready. Elizabeth gathered the necessary items into her bag, took another look around the apartment, the luxurious cage where years of her life had been spent. Then she walked out, closing the door tightly behind her. As she rode the elevator down, she thought about the fact that she would only come back here to pack the rest of her things. This chapter of her life was over. But what awaited next? She didn't know yet. In the cab taking her to Shakira's house, Elizabeth pulled out her phone and opened her contacts. Fingers hovered over Naomi's name. Her sister had betrayed her, but she'd been betrayed too. And she was courageous enough to tell the truth, knowing it could cost her relationship with her sister. Elizabeth didn't call her sister, but she didn't delete her number either. Their relationship had changed forever, but she wasn't ready to sever that bond completely yet. Today she lost her husband and her trust in her sister. Tomorrow, she would have to start building a new life, for herself and her child. And that life wouldn't include Trenton Lester, the man who destroyed everything she believed in. It's been a week since Elizabeth kicked her husband out of the house, 7 days filled with calls from Trenton that she dropped, messages that went unread, and visits to the clinic for more tests. The confirmatory HIV test came back positive. The doctor prescribed antiretroviral therapy, explained the risks and prospects. Elizabeth listened mechanically, as if the conversation were about someone else. She stayed with Shakira temporarily. There was plenty of room in their spacious suburban home, and her friend's husband, Marcus, was sensitive and understanding. He didn't ask questions when Elizabeth locked herself in the guest room and lay staring at the ceiling for hours. He called again, Shakira said as she entered the room with a cup of herbal tea. Trenton says he took the test, that it came back negative. Elizabeth sat up abruptly on the bed. What? He's lying. Shakira set the cup on the bedside table. Or he faked the results, or he really doesn't know his status yet. HIV may not show up in tests in the early stages. Elizabeth clenched her fists. He knew. He'd known all along, and now he was trying to get out of it. Shakira looked at her friend carefully. "What are you going to do?" Elizabeth silently picked up the cup of tea and took a sip. Her eyes were dry, her gaze detached. "Naomi called," Shakira continued cautiously. "I don't want to talk to her," Elizabeth cut her off. "She's worried about you. And the baby." Elizabeth grinned bitterly. If she was worried, she wouldn't be sleeping with my husband. Shakira sighed. "Liz, I'm not making excuses for her. What she did is inexcusable. But at least she found the strength to tell you the truth." Elizabeth set the cup down and looked at her friend intently. "You're right," she said after a pause. "I must talk to her." They met in a small park not far from Shakira's house. The day was overcast, with a light rain drizzling down. Elizabeth sat on a bench under a large oak tree, watching Naomi approach along the winding path. Her sister looked even worse than she had a week ago, gaunt and wan. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Naomi said, sitting down next to her but keeping her distance. Elizabeth stared at her sister in silence. The rage that had been raging inside her all these days had strangely subsided, replaced by a cold resolve. "You were right," she said at last. "The test was positive." Naomi turned even paler. "Liz, I'm so sorry." "Have you started treatment yet?" Elizabeth interrupted her. "Yes," Naomi nodded. "The doctor says that with the right treatment I can live a full life, that the viral load can become undetectable and—" "Trenton called my friend," Elizabeth interrupted her again. "He claimed he'd taken the test and it was negative." Naomi froze. "But that's impossible. I've never been with anyone but him, and the test is definitely—" "He's lying," Elizabeth said sternly. "Or faked the results. He's a lawyer. That's not a problem for him." Naomi clenched her hands into fists. The bastard. He knew. All along he knew. Elizabeth nodded. "And that's why he's going to pay." There was something in her voice that made Naomi tense. "What do you mean?" Elizabeth turned to her sister. Her eyes were as cold as a snake's before it struck. "I'm ready to forgive you, Naomi," she said slowly, "but only if you help me get revenge on him." "Revenge?" Naomi jerked forward. "You mean sue him? Or—" "I mean kill him," Elizabeth said quietly. "Make him pay for what he did to us, for what he did to my baby." Naomi recoiled, looking at her sister wide-eyed. "Liz, you don't mean it. This is a crime. We can't just—" "He's already committed a crime." Elizabeth leaned closer. "He gave us a deadly disease. He condemned my child to a life with HIV. What kind of mother would I be if I just let him walk away?" "But murder. If you don't want to help, I understand." Elizabeth straightened up. "I just thought you'd want to make up for what you did. Make it up to me." Naomi stared at her sister, not recognizing her. Instead of the sensible, always collected Elizabeth, she was a stranger with an icy stare and a stone face. "How do you imagine it?" Naomi asked after a long pause. Elizabeth smiled weakly. "I have a plan." The plan was surprisingly simple and even more frightening. Elizabeth spelled out the details in a calm, businesslike tone, as if it were a trivial work task, not the murder of a man. "We'll invite him to a meeting. Tell him we want to talk about the future, about the baby," she explained. "I'll tell him I'm aware of my reaction and I'm ready for a constructive dialogue. He'll bite. Trenton always liked things to go his way." "And then?" Naomi asked quietly. "I'll buy some strong sleeping pills," Elizabeth continued. "We'll put it in the wine. When he passes out, we'll drive him out of town, to the abandoned Fairfield Bridge. You know it?" Naomi shook her head. "There aren't many people there, especially at night," Elizabeth said in a measured voice, as if she were giving a lecture. "When he wakes up, I'll make him confess. To all the cheating, the lies, that he knowingly infected us." "I kill him?" "Yes," Elizabeth answered simply. "And then we'll dump the body in the river." Naomi shuddered. "Liz, this is crazy. We'll get caught. And then what will happen to your baby?" "We won't get caught," Elizabeth shook her head. "I've thought of everything. We'll wear gloves. We'll use his car. Leave no trace. They'll write the murder off as some deal gone wrong or a robbery. Trenton's a lawyer. He's got a lot of enemies." "But, look," Elizabeth put her hand on her sister's knee. "I understand your fear. But think about what he did to us. He knew about his diagnosis and still slept with us without protection. He condemned us to a lifelong illness, Naomi. He deserves to be punished." Naomi was silent for a long time, looking at her hands. Then slowly she looked up. "What do I have to do?" All the following days passed in a strange, almost feverish state. Elizabeth methodically prepared for her husband's murder, as if for an important business presentation. She chose Friday, the day when most people leave town for the weekend. She got sleeping pills through Shakira, who unknowingly wrote a prescription for insomnia. Bought gloves, strong rope, black clothes. Naomi watched her sister with growing concern. Elizabeth had stopped crying, hardly spoke of the baby, never mentioned her diagnosis. Her entire being was focused on her impending revenge. "Are you sure we should do this?" Naomi asked when they met to go over the final details. "Maybe there's another way?" "What way?" Elizabeth asked sharply. "Should I sue him? Where it will be my word against his word. Where I'll look like a hysterical pregnant woman and he'll look like a successful lawyer with an impeccable reputation. No, Naomi. Justice in this world must be taken for ourselves." Thursday night, Elizabeth called Trenton. He picked up after the first ring, as if he'd been expecting her call. "Liz?" There was hope in his voice. "I'm so glad you called." "We need to talk," she said flatly, "about the baby, about our future." "Of course," he agreed immediately. "I've been trying to reach you all week." "I know." Elizabeth paused. "I needed time to think about it. I want to meet tomorrow. Come to our apartment at 7 p.m. He stammered. "You're back home?" "Yes," she lied. "This is still our home, Trenton, and we need to decide what our future will be." When the conversation ended, Elizabeth looked at Naomi. "He bought it," she said. "Tomorrow it'll all be over." Friday, 7 o'clock at night. Elizabeth and Naomi waited in the apartment Elizabeth hadn't visited since the night she'd kicked her husband out. On the living room table was a bottle of expensive wine, Trenton's favorite wine, and 3 glasses. A powerful sleeping pill had been added to the wine intended for Trenton. The dosage, according to Shakira, was enough to put a grown man to sleep for several hours. "What if he doesn't drink?" Naomi asked nervously. "He would," Elizabeth replied confidently. "Trenton always drinks when he's nervous, and tonight he would be nervous." The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Trenton was always punctual. Elizabeth opened the door. Trenton stood on the doorstep, neatly dressed as always, but looking tired. In his hands he held a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. "Hi," he said with an uncertain smile. "I'm glad you agreed to talk." Elizabeth silently accepted the flowers and stepped back, letting him into the apartment. Trenton froze when he saw Naomi sitting in the living room. "What is she doing here?" he asked tensely. "She's part of this conversation, too," Elizabeth replied, walking into the living room and placing the flowers on the table. "After all, you slept with both of us, and infected us both." Trenton pressed his lips together. "I took the test, Liz. It's negative. I can show you the results. Sit down." Elizabeth pointed to the couch. "We'll have some wine and talk quietly. About everything." Trenton hesitated, eyeing the sisters suspiciously. Then he sat down, keeping as much distance from Naomi as possible. Elizabeth poured the wine into glasses, making sure Trenton got the one with the sleeping pills in it. "To frank conversation," she said, raising her glass. Trenton took the glass but didn't drink. "I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you," he began. "I made the mistake of getting involved with your sister. It was a momentary weakness that grew into something more." "Have a drink," Elizabeth said softly. "We have a long conversation to have." Trenton took a small sip, then another, more confident. Elizabeth and Naomi exchanged glances. "I want you to know that my feelings for you haven't changed," Trenton continued. "I still love you, Liz, and I will love our child." "You said the same thing to me," Naomi said quietly, "that you loved me, that your marriage to Liz was a mistake." Trenton gave her an annoyed look. "I never said that." He sipped more wine. "I never promised you anything serious." "But you slept with me." Naomi leaned forward, "knowing you had HIV. "I don't have HIV," Trenton exclaimed, finishing his wine in one gulp. I took the test, damn it, it was negative. Elizabeth calmly took the bottle and refilled the wine in his glass. Maybe you faked the results, she suggested, or bought someone at the lab. You're a lawyer, Trenton. You have connections. Trenton shook his head, but the movement came out oddly slow. I didn't. He frowned, looking at the glass. What the? Drink, Elizabeth said, looking him in the eye. Drink up, Trenton. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't budge. Trenton grabbed the armrest of the couch, trying to keep his balance. What, did you do? He mumbled, struggling to move his tongue. Something that should have been done a long time ago, Elizabeth replied, as she watched her husband slowly sink back onto the couch. Trenton's eyes began to close, but before he finally fell into darkness, he saw Elizabeth's face, calm, almost peaceful. He's too heavy, Naomi whispered as they tried to drag the unconscious Trenton to the car. I won't be able to hold him. We have to, Elizabeth gritted her teeth. We don't have a choice. They managed to drag Trenton to the underground parking lot where his Audi was parked. Elizabeth had found out ahead of time that the building's security cameras were down due to technical problems, a coincidence too good to ignore. They laid Trenton in the back seat of the car and covered him with a plaid blanket. From the outside, it looked like the man was just sleeping. I'll drive, Elizabeth said, taking the car keys from Trenton's pocket. You sit next to him and make sure he doesn't wake up early. Naomi nodded, her face pale, her hands trembling. The drive to the abandoned Fairfield Bridge took almost an hour. They drove in silence, each immersed in her own thoughts. Trenton moved once and groaned, but didn't wake up. Naomi looked anxiously at her sister. We didn't... Killed him with those sleeping pills? No, Elizabeth shook her head. The dosage is correct. He'll wake up in an hour or two. The Fairfield Bridge was an old structure, abandoned after a new bridge was built 5 miles upstream. It was in a remote part of the county where even the locals rarely visited. Elizabeth parked the car on the side of the road and turned off the engine. Now we have to get him out and carry him to the bridge, she said. We'll tie him to the railing and wait for him to wake up. Liz, are you sure? Naomi began, but stopped short when she met her sister's cold gaze. The two of them pulled the still unconscious Trenton out of the car and dragged him to the middle of the bridge. The night was moonless, dark. Only the flashlight Elizabeth had thoughtfully brought with her lit their way. They tied Trenton to the railing of the bridge with a strong rope that Elizabeth had bought for the purpose. Then they sat down opposite and waited. It was about half an hour before Trenton began to come to his senses. At first he just groaned, then he opened his eyes, blinking slowly and trying to realize where he was. What? Where am I? He mumbled in a hoarse voice. Elizabeth turned on the flashlight and aimed the beam at his face. Trenton squinted against the bright light. Liz? What's going on? He tried to move and only then realized he was tied up. What are you doing? Untie me. Not until you tell us the truth, Elizabeth said, stepping closer. In her hand was a gun, small, black, glinting menacingly in the flashlight. Trenton stared at the weapon, his eyes widening with fear. Where did you get a gun? Liz, you're crazy. This is a kidnapping. This is justice. Elizabeth interrupted him. My sister and I want the truth, Trenton. The whole truth. About your cheating. About your illness. I've already told you I have no disease, Trenton exclaimed, twitching in his restraints. The test was negative. Elizabeth pointed the gun at his head. One more lie and I'll pull the trigger. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Last chance, Trenton. Tell us the truth. Trenton stared into the muzzle of the gun, his face, illuminated by the flashlight, contorted with fear. All right, he blurted out. Yeah, I cheated on you. Not just with Naomi. There were other women. Elizabeth nodded, as if that confirmed some of her thoughts. How many? What? How many women? Trenton? She moved the gun closer to his temple. I want to know the exact number. Trenton swallowed. I'm not sure. Maybe 6 or 7 in the last 2 years. Naomi let out a quiet gasp. Elizabeth only raised an eyebrow slightly. And you had unprotected sex with them? All of them? No, Trenton blurted out. I mean, not all of them. Sometimes. Sometimes I used condoms. But not always. Elizabeth shook her head. Not always, right? Right, Trenton whispered. Look, Liz, I made a mistake, a lot of mistakes. I was an idiot, I admit that. But I can change. For our baby, for you. Elizabeth looked at her husband intently. Now tell me the truth about your diagnosis. About HIV. Trenton started to deny again, but Elizabeth pressed the muzzle of the gun against his temple so hard that he cried out in pain. We tested positive, Trenton, she hissed. Me and Naomi. The only common denominator is you. So stop lying, or I will shoot you in the head right now. All right, Trenton screamed. Yes, I have HIV. I found out 8 months ago, but I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone. It would have ruined my career, my reputation. So, you decided to ruin our lives instead. Elizabeth took a step back. To infect your wife, your sister, and possibly your unborn child. I started taking medication, Trenton said quickly. 3 months ago. The doctor said the viral load would go down, that the risk of transmission would be minimal. But you still didn't tell me. Elizabeth shook her head. You didn't give me a choice, didn't let me protect myself and my baby. Liz, please. Trenton had tears in his eyes. I love you. I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still your husband, the father of your child. We can get through this together. Elizabeth looked at him with a long, studying gaze. No, Trenton, she said finally. We can't. And she pulled the trigger. The shot rang out in the silence of the night, echoing across the abandoned bridge. Trenton's body jerked and collapsed, the blood from the bullet hole in his temple dripping slowly down his face. Naomi covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming. Elizabeth lowered the gun, her face calm, almost detached. Help me untie him, she said to her sister. We need to dump the body in the river. Naomi didn't move, paralyzed by the horror of what had just happened. Naomi, Elizabeth sharply called out to her. Wake up! We have to finish this. With trembling hands, Naomi helped her sister untie the ropes holding Trenton's body. Together they dragged him to the edge of the bridge. On the count of 3, Elizabeth commanded. 1, 2. They pushed the body into the dark water. A splash and then silence. The current swiftly picked up Trenton, carrying him down the river. Elizabeth shined her flashlight on the railing, checking for signs of blood. Then she gathered up the rope and put it in the backpack she'd brought with her. That's it, she said. We can go back now. Naomi looked at her sister with a mixture of horror and disbelief. You killed him, she whispered. You really did. We killed him, Elizabeth corrected her. We both had a part in it. They walked back to the car. The night was quiet, only the sound of the river breaking the stillness. Naomi walked behind her sister, watching her confident movements. Elizabeth acted methodically, as if she were performing a routine task, not just taking a man's life. I can't believe we did this, Naomi whispered as they approached the car. We really did kill Trenton. Elizabeth turned to her sister. In the lamplight, her face seemed carved from stone cold, hard, without a single emotion. He deserved it, she said. He deliberately infected us, Naomi. He condemned our child to a lifetime with this disease. I know, but... Naomi wrapped her arms around herself. The police will be looking for him. They'll find out what happened. No. Elizabeth shook her head. No one will connect us to his disappearance. We have no motive that anyone knows about. Everyone will think it has to do with his work, probably to some dark business he was doing. They stood outside the car, facing each other. Naomi looked lost, frightened. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was calm. We need to get back to town, she said. I'll drive. Naomi nodded and reached for the doorknob. At that moment, Elizabeth raised her gun and pointed it at her sister. What are you doing? Naomi froze, her eyes widening in horror. I'm sorry, Naomi. Elizabeth's voice was quiet, almost gentle. But I can't let you leave. What are you talking about? Naomi took a step back, then another. Liz, it's me, your sister. The sister who slept with my husband. Elizabeth didn't lower the gun. The sister who always wanted what was mine. No, Liz. Naomi shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I didn't. I made a terrible mistake with Trenton, but I never meant to hurt you. But you did. Elizabeth took a step forward. You knew he was married, that I loved him, and you went to bed with him anyway. I was weak, Naomi sobbed, not trying to wipe away her tears. Selfish, But Liz, I'm your sister, your blood. You betrayed me. Elizabeth didn't flinch. And now you know too much. You're the only one who can connect me to Trenton's murder. I will never tell anyone, Naomi exclaimed. I swear to you, I'll take this secret to my grave. That's exactly what I plan to do, Elizabeth replied, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out as sharply as the first. Naomi staggered backward, pressing her hands to her chest where a dark stain was spreading rapidly. She stared at her sister with an expression of utter disbelief and pain, then slowly settled to the ground. Why? She whispered, looking up at Elizabeth from below. For betraying me, Elizabeth answered, leaning toward her sister. For the pain you've caused me, for taking my normal life away from me. I love you, Liz, Naomi breathed out, her eyes beginning to glaze over. I always have. Loved. Elizabeth watched the life leave her sister's eyes. When Naomi fell silent, she checked her pulse to make sure it was over. Then she took the body under her arms and dragged it toward the bridge. She acted mechanically, as if she were doing a chore. Dragged the body to the spot from which they had dropped Trenton and pushed Naomi into the dark water. A splash, a ripple on the water, and the river took the second body of the night. Elizabeth stood on the bridge for a few more minutes, looking down. There was no regret or remorse in her mind, only cold, calculating logic. Naomi knew too much. She could have broken down, she could have blabbed, she could have gone to the police. The risk was too great. Back at the car, Elizabeth carefully checked for any traces of blood. Then she got behind the wheel and drove slowly onto the road. She followed all the rules of the road, did not exceed the speed limit, did not make sharp maneuvers. Nothing in her behavior would have attracted the attention of a random police patrol. On the way back to town, Elizabeth stopped at a deserted observation deck over the bay. There she pulled a rope, a gun, and gloves from her backpack and tossed them into the water. The murder weapons disappeared into the dark waters of the bay. She left Trenton's car in the multi-level parking lot of the mall, wiping down every surface she could touch. She tossed the keys into a nearby sewer manhole. Elizabeth then hailed a cab and returned to Shakira's apartment where she was temporarily staying. How was your evening? Her friend asked when Elizabeth entered the house. It was fine, she replied. We talked, we drank wine, we talked about the future. Shakira looked at her friend carefully. Are you okay? You look tired. Just a long day. Elizabeth smiled weakly. I think I'm going to go to bed. In her room, Elizabeth stood in front of the mirror for a long time, scrutinizing her reflection. She looked for signs of remorse, fear, regret, something to prove that she was still human and not a cold, calculating monster. But she found nothing. She took the lives of two people, her husband and her sister, and felt nothing but a strange, devastating relief. Elizabeth lay in bed with her hand on her rounded belly. Somewhere in there, inside, her baby was growing, the child she was trying to protect, the child she had killed for.